Settle a little more deeply into the place where you are resting, and let the weight of the day pass quietly into the bed beneath you. Allow your hands to become still, your shoulders to soften, and your breathing to find its own easy pace. You do not need to remember every name or hold on to every detail. The old city will move slowly enough for you to wander without effort, and whenever your thoughts begin to drift, you may simply drift with them. I'm the Yawning Historian, and tonight we will spend one unhurried night in Edo, beginning here at dusk on Nihonbashi, passing through bells and gates, small rooms and lantern streets, then following the moon toward Ryogoku before returning to this bridge as the darkness thins toward dawn. For now, there was only the bridge beneath us and the evening gathering gently around it. This was late Edo, broadly in the first half of the 19th century, though no single evening could stand for every year, every season, or every neighborhood in the long life of the city. Customs changed, streets changed, and even familiar routines could vary with weather and circumstance. We will not try to pin the scene to one exact date. It is enough to imagine a mild evening when the light had faded from pale gold to smoky blue, and the broad wooden crossing at Nihonbashi still held the last quiet traces of the working day. Nihonbashi occupied a central position in the way Edo was understood and arranged, a point around which the city's commercial life gathered and from which its larger pattern could unfold. Roads and waterways seemed to carry the scale of Edo outward, while goods and people moved inward from many directions. Yet from the middle of the bridge at dusk, that grand pattern did not need to feel grand at all. It could be sensed in smaller things: worn boards under sandals, the settling murmur beside the river, the darkening fronts of shops, and the last measured movements of workers putting ordinary objects away. All day, the district had belonged to exchange. Bundles had arrived, accounts had been kept, doors had opened, and voices had passed from one side of a counter to another. Cargo traffic linked Osaka with Edo and helped supply the city through commercial networks that seemed immense when viewed as a whole. At street level, their scale might be felt in repeated acts. A load shifted, a package checked, a cord tightened, a boat nudged into place. By evening, the day's motion softened. A worker could lift one last crate only a short distance, straighten it against another, and step back as if making the smallest possible correction before rest. Near the river, warehouses stood as part of the recognizable Nihonbashi landscape. Hiroshige's famous view of the bridge included riverside storage buildings and the activity associated with the nearby fish market, arranged with an artist's care rather than fixed like one photographed instant. It offered broad shapes that people could recognize without preserving every passing shadow. Roof lines met the dim sky, walls gathered the cool color of evening, and the water carried softened reflections that lengthened, broke, and joined again whenever a boat or current disturbed them. The nearby fish market would become more noticeable toward the beginning of another day, when deliveries and early movement gathered near the bridge. That belonged to the later part of our night. At this hour, we need not turn it into a loud scene of labor. A few baskets might have been rinsed or stacked. A damp patch of ground might have held the day's last reflected light, and the smell of river water could mingle with wood, rope, and the faint remains of commerce. These are gentle possibilities rather than a claim about one particular evening, so we hold them lightly, as one holds the edge of a blanket before letting it fall. Along the streets near the bridge, shops were beginning to close. Not every door moved at once, and no single routine would have governed the whole district. One household might have finished early, while another still completed a sale or sorted what remained from the day. A panel slid into place. A shutter met its frame with a low wooden note. Inside, a lamp could remain visible for a little longer as someone checked an account, folded a cloth, or placed a small tool where it would be found in the morning. Outside, the shop front became flatter and quieter, its many invitations to look and buy slowly disappearing into a continuous line of darkened wood. There was comfort in the repeated work of closing. Nothing needed to be hurried. A hand moved along the edge of a door to make sure it sat correctly. A cord was looped, then tested with a gentle pull. Loose items were brought inside, not with drama, but because the day had reached its ordinary end. The street seemed to exhale as each opening narrowed. Where there had been shelves, signs, wares, and faces, there were now boards, seams, and the warmest hint of light escaping through a gap. The change came one shop at a time, and the evening absorbed each little sound without keeping it for long. The bridge remained open to the sky. From its center, the last daylight rested on the water longer than it rested between the buildings. The river's surface did not become dark all at once. It kept bands of gray, dull silver, and deep blue, with small amber marks wherever a lantern stood near enough to be reflected. Boats associated with the city's trade might still have had places to go, while traffic could thin as work ended. Some forms were clear enough to recognize, and others had already become low silhouettes. The creak of wood and the soft dip of an oar were carried under the bridge, rounded by distance until they seemed almost part of the water itself. Edo depended on waterways as well as streets, and goods moved between Osaka and Edo along the routes of commerce. The full journey of any cargo was long compared with this quiet crossing, but the river offered a trace of that wider movement. Perhaps a mooring line tightened as a boat shifted. Perhaps a covered load waited beside a warehouse wall. We do not need to decide what every bundle contained. It is enough to notice that the city rested on many layers of work, most of them modest and repetitive, and that at dusk those layers began to fold over one another like cloth laid carefully in a chest. People still crossed Nihonbashi, though there was more space between them now. A small group passed and was gone. A solitary figure followed at a slower pace. Someone carrying a load adjusted it without stopping, then continued toward a street where the eaves gathered close. Clothing, footwear, rank, occupation, and destination would have varied greatly across Edo, and a calm imagined walk should not flatten those differences into a single picture of city life. We can simply let the figures remain partly indistinct. Their footsteps sounded briefly on the boards, then receded, leaving behind the steadier noises of water, wood, and a city preparing for night. Surviving prints made Nihonbashi familiar through carefully organized views that balanced near and far, human activity and landscape, the immediate bridge, and the larger city beyond. Such images were composed, not perfect inventories of one passing hour, yet they suggest how recognizable this crossing had become. A viewer could know the place through the span of the bridge, the river traffic, the clustered buildings, and the distant order of the city. Standing within our quieter version of the scene, we allow those elements to settle around us, less crisp than ink on paper and softer beneath the deepening evening sky. Beyond the bridge, the commercial center did not vanish when the shop fronts closed. Its shapes remained: storage buildings near the river, rows of premises along the streets, lanes leading away between them. Yet evening changed the balance of what could be noticed. During daylight, goods and signs would ask for attention. After dusk, surfaces took over. Plaster, timber, roof tile, paper, rope, and water each received the remaining light differently. One wall held a faint gray glow while a wooden door looked almost black. A lantern made a narrow threshold seem briefly warm, and beyond its circle the city returned to blue shadow. One of the lanes beside the commercial street seemed to draw the eye inward. Its far end was already indistinct, while nearer boards and eaves remained just visible. A traveler could pass through that narrow opening and be absorbed by the city within a few steps. We stayed on the bridge a little longer and watched the darkness receive each small movement without making it disappear entirely. A sleeve caught the lantern light, a shadow crossed a wall, and then the lane became quiet again, holding the promise of streets that would unfold later at the same patient pace. As more doors settled, conversation grew less continuous. A few words traveled clearly from a nearby entrance, followed by the sound of something light being set down. Farther away, voices became texture rather than speech. The city was not silent, and it would not become completely silent during the night. Edo contained too many homes, duties, journeys, and small necessities for that. But the quality of the sound changed. Daytime noises had stood beside one another, each distinct and purposeful. Evening noises arrived with wider spaces between them, allowing the low river, a footstep, or a closing panel to be heard and then released. No exact modern clock time can be placed over this scene. Daylight and darkness were each divided into 6 parts, so the duration of an hour changed with the season. The city's sense of time therefore rested partly on the shape of light and dark rather than on equal units marching through every month. Later, bells would help mark the night, but for now dusk itself was the gentlest measure. Shadows lengthened, lamps became more useful, faces became less distinct, and the river slowly exchanged the color of the sky for the small, wavering colors along its banks. A lantern was lit near a doorway. Its paper surface turned from pale and almost invisible to softly luminous, and the wood around it gained an amber edge. Another light appeared farther down the street, then another across the river. They did not flood the district. Each one held only a small portion of the evening, leaving generous darkness between. In that darkness, rooflines softened and distant signs became shapes without words. The scattered lights did not make the city feel fully awake. They made it feel carefully inhabited, as though each flame marked a small room of attention surrounded by the larger rest of night. From the bridge, we could follow one of those lights with our eyes until it disappeared behind a moving figure. We could watch its reflection lengthen on the river and break apart. There was no need to follow yet. Our path through Edo would unfold in stages, and the bridge offered time to feel the scale of that passage. Tonight would not be a survey of monuments or a sequence of rulers. It would be a night of ordinary textures, approached gently, with uncertain details left soft at the edges instead of being made sharper than the past allows. In a while, we will listen for the bells that divided the changing hours of darkness. Their tones will reach us over the roofs, marking a night whose portions stretched or narrowed with the season. Beyond them, gates and watch houses will appear beside the streets, their routines varying from one neighborhood and time to another. There will be no alarm in our walk. A patrol will pass at an easy pace. A small lamp will remain near a guardhouse, and the wooden city will rest beneath the patient attention of people carrying out familiar work. After that, the journey will enter a much smaller space, a room in a commoner's Nagaya. We will rest near a hearth, a water jar, wicker containers, folded bedding, and thin divisions between neighboring lives, allowing the typical arrangement to remain only one grounded example rather than every household in Edo. Sounds will pass softly through the partitions. The scale of the city will contract from bridge and river to a few useful possessions placed where hands could reach them in the dark. Later, lanterns will lead us into side streets where book lenders, popular images, and modest night stalls belong to the late Edo landscape. We will not make the stalls into a feast or linger over another morning market. They will remain points of warmth and livelihood, a bowl set down, a page turned, a borrowed volume carried home, an inexpensive picture glimpsed before the light became too low. Commerce will continue there in a quieter register, less like the broad exchange of Nihonbashi and more like a conversation held within the circle of one lamp. We will then move toward Ryogoku Bridge and the broad Sumida, where Hiroshige arranged twilight, the moon, bridge traffic, boats, and reflected light in one surviving view. That composition will help us approach the custom of waiting for the moon without claiming that every visitor stood in the same place or felt the same thing. By then, the night will seem deeper, and the river's dark surface will hold a pale path that trembles whenever the water moves. At last, before the city fully wakes, we will return to Nihonbashi. The unequal seasonal hours will matter again, and the bridge's pre-dawn 7 will remind us that old names for time cannot be translated into one fixed modern hour. Movement near the fish market and riverside warehouses will begin to gather, first as distant shapes, and then as the small beginnings of another working day. We will leave before morning becomes busy, completing the circle while the bridge is still suspended between the night that has passed and the day preparing to arrive. That whole journey waited ahead, but nothing required us to begin it quickly. Nihonbashi at dusk still had room for a few more slow observations. On one bank, a worker disappeared behind a door, and the light within narrowed to a line before the panel closed. On the other, a lantern remained beside stacked forms that may have been baskets or bundles, their exact contents already lost to shadow. The bridge accepted both clarity and uncertainty. History often came to us in the same way, through named places and known customs surrounded by ordinary moments that left no written trace. The last colors overhead had become subdued. Blue deepened toward navy, while a narrow remnant of warmth rested low beyond the roofs. The palette of the city was now made from dark timber, muted walls, soft paper light, and occasional glints on water. Nothing shone sharply. Even the amber lanterns seemed covered by the air between us and them. It was easy to imagine the bridge growing lighter beneath our feet as fewer people crossed, though the boards themselves had not changed. Space had opened around each remaining traveler, and every step received a longer moment before the next one came. Somewhere behind the row of buildings, an object was moved across a floor. The sound was brief, practical, and soon complete. A door settled. A voice answered another voice, then both faded. The district did not perform its closing for us. It simply continued a habit repeated through many evenings, with differences that could no longer be listed. That ordinariness was the reason to remain. Great cities were lived not only through exceptional days, but through countless small endings. When work was stored, thresholds were secured, lights were lowered, and people prepared to occupy a quieter portion of their lives. On the bridge, we could let the commercial day fall away without judging whether it had been prosperous, tiring, or uneventful. Those stories belonged to individuals we could not recover. What remained available was the shared pattern of transition. Goods stopped moving for a time. Public faces withdrew indoors. The open water continued to carry sound through the district. A central place in Edo could become, for a short while, a collection of simple surfaces under dusk. We need not add a number to the city's size or make a sensational claim about its population. The bridge was busy enough in the evidence and peaceful enough in our present imagining. Soon we would step away from the center of Nihonbashi and allow its rail, roofs, warehouses, and river to recede behind us. We would carry only the rhythm of the place, wood beneath foot, water below, a lantern at the edge of vision, and the long spaces growing between sounds. The city ahead would not rush to reveal itself. Its hours would be marked gradually, its rooms entered quietly, its streets crossed without urgency. Each chapter would feel like another slow breath, leading farther into night and then gently back toward morning. For one more moment, remain at the middle of the bridge. Let the cool river air move past. Let the final shopfront settle into shadow, and let the reflections loosen across the dark water below. There is no hurry at all. Nihonbashi will wait behind us while we drift toward the distant bell, and the night will open at the pace of an easy, even breath. Nihonbashi waited behind us as we left the middle of the bridge and followed the evening into a narrower street. The river's low movement remained audible for a while, though each turn placed another row of buildings between the water and our path. The last shop fronts had become dark plains of wood, and the lanterns ahead seemed farther apart than they had appeared from the bridge. We did not need to choose our direction quickly. The city's own measures of night would guide us, not through a modern clock face, but through fading light, familiar routine, and the bell that carried an approximate hour across part of Edo. Time in this city did not pass in equal modern hours. The span from sunrise to sunset was divided into 6 portions, and the span from sunset to sunrise was divided into another 6. A portion of daylight could therefore lengthen during one part of the year and shorten during another, while a portion of darkness changed in the opposite way. The named hours belonged to that seasonal rhythm. They could not be laid neatly over one fixed point on a clock that continued unchanged from winter to summer. This did not make time vague to the people who lived by it. It made time responsive to the sky. The amount of light in a day was already familiar through work, travel, household routine, and the changing appearance of streets at morning and evening. A winter night and a summer night did not ask to be divided in precisely the same way. Each was given 6 dark portions, even though the darkness available to divide was not the same length. The result was a pattern that moved gently through the year, expanding and contracting while its names remained recognizable. For our imagined walk in the first half of the 19th century, we will not convert the present hour into an exact number. We cannot say that every lantern was lit at one modern minute, or that every gate moved at another. Even a named Edo hour would shift against a mechanical clock as the season changed. It is enough to know that sunset had passed, and the first part of darkness was settling over the city. The bridge had quieted. Shops had begun to close at their own pace. Somewhere within earshot, people were waiting for a sound that made the approximate progress of evening easier to share. That sound came from the bell of time at Nihonbashi Hongo-kucho. It let residents know the approximate hour, a useful word because the bell was part of a lived system rather than a promise of modern precision. Records place the original bell's move from Edo Castle to Nihonbashi Hongo-kucho in 1626. By our late Edo night, that move belonged to a much earlier century. The practice had developed over time, settling into the city's memory long before our quiet passage through these streets. We might first notice the bell not as a sharp interruption, but as a broad tone arriving through the spaces between buildings. Its exact sound on one undocumented evening cannot be recovered, so we imagine it gently. A strike could begin with a firm center and then soften as it traveled, reaching a roof, a wall, an open lane, and the edge of a closed shop. Nearer listeners would receive it more fully. Farther away, It might arrive as a low vibration that seemed to belong to the air itself. The tone would diminish. Yet for a little, while its presence could be felt after the ear no longer held a clear note. The bell did not need to make every task begin or end at once. One person could recognize the hour while continuing to arrange a room. Another might take the sound as a reminder to complete a small errand. Someone walking could simply keep walking, now aware of where the evening stood within its changing division. The sound offered common orientation without erasing private schedules. It reached people whose lives differed in occupation, household, means, and obligation, then passed on without asking them to respond in the same way. Residents within earshot paid a small monthly fee for the bell, a modest detail that gives the floating sound an ordinary administrative side. We do not need to invent the exchange by which every payment was collected, nor assume that all arrangements remained identical across decades. The fee is enough to show that a tone drifting freely over roofs still depended upon maintenance, organization, and contribution. Even the gentlest fading note had behind it a routine of people accounting for a service they shared. As Edo expanded, more time bells appeared, placing the Hongo Kucho bell within a larger development rather than leaving it as the city's only keeper of the hours. Different districts could hear different bells, each sound carrying across a limited reach of buildings and streets. We will not draw exact boundaries around what could be heard on this particular night. Wind, distance, construction, and the ordinary noise of a city would all shape the experience. We simply remain near enough to Hongo Kucho for the bell to give our walk its first slow measure. After the tone faded, the street seemed quieter because we had been listening so closely. A sandal touched the ground ahead, then another. A lantern moved past the end of a lane and left the opening dark again. From behind a closed frontage came a murmur too soft to separate into words. None of these sounds competed with the bell now that it was gone. They occupied the space it had opened, appearing one at a time before returning to the gentle background of night. The bell's usefulness rested partly in that shared moment of recognition. A listener did not need to see the tower or stand beside the instrument. The tone traveled outward and became part of many separate evenings at once, reaching one person in a lane, another near a doorway, and perhaps another already inside. We leave their identities unknown and their responses varied. Some might have noticed only the final resonance, while others heard the fuller sound. Then each returned to a private task, carrying the approximate hour with them as lightly as the lantern glow carried along the wall. The divisions of darkness continued whether or not we counted them. Each portion had its place within the night, yet its length depended on the season that held it. In a long winter darkness, a night portion would be longer than one in summer. In summer, daylight received the longer divisions. This is the simple reason an Edo hour should not be translated into one permanent modern time. When we later return to Nihonbashi before dawn, an old reference to the bridge's 7 will belong to this flexible system, not to a single clock reading valid throughout the year. For now, the bell led us away from the broad commercial setting of the bridge and toward the smaller structures of neighborhood care. The Edo Tokyo Museum's model of a typical late Edo town includes wooden gates, a gatekeeper's hut, a guardhouse, and a fire lookout. These elements placed watching, passage, and prevention within the built landscape of ordinary streets. They did not stand apart as dramatic monuments. They belonged near merchants' houses in Nagaya, among the entrances, walls, and paths through which people moved in their daily lives. A wooden gate could mark an entry between one part of the town and another. Kido and Banya were connected with night traffic control, patrol, public order, disaster prevention, and neighborhood administration, although their practices changed and varied over time. We therefore should not imagine that every gate in Edo closed at one universal hour, or that every neighborhood followed one fixed procedure. One place could organize its evening differently from another, and a practice known from one period need not describe the whole Edo era without adjustment. The gate ahead of us was best imagined as one example rather than a rule. It stood within a street that had nearly finished its daytime business, with a nearby hut and guardhouse belonging to the typical town arrangement. Perhaps the gate was still allowing passage. Perhaps its position had already been adjusted for the night under a local routine whose timing is no longer clear. We do not need to decide. The broader purpose was to regulate movement after dark, while the precise method could vary with place, period, and circumstance. Traffic control at night did not mean that every traveler faced a dramatic barrier. It could be understood as part of the quieter work of knowing who and what moved through a neighborhood, and of maintaining an order suited to hours when streets were less active. The gates and guard facilities belong to this work, though no complete account preserves every exchange. A person arriving might have been noticed, a route might have been considered, or a local instruction might have been followed. We hold those actions as possibilities, not as a single script repeated everywhere. Near the gate, the banya formed part of the neighborhood arrangement, gathering duties of watching and local administration close to the place where movement was controlled. These were practical places. Their importance lay less in visual grandeur than in the responsibilities repeated there. A lamp, a sheltered place to sit, and the presence of people responsible for the watch can be imagined as gentle connective details, while the grounded functions remain patrol, traffic control, public order, prevention, equipment, and administrative care. The night watch was made of intervals. A person remained near the guard facility for a time. Another responsibility could involve patrol through nearby streets, but the route did not need to become a tense search. On an ordinary evening, it might have been familiar and followed at a familiar pace. The watcher's attention could rest on entrances, darkened frontages, and the condition of the neighborhood, then move on. Most of what was observed may have needed no response at all. We could follow at a respectful distance as such a route passed through the town. The figure ahead would be defined mainly by a small light and the quiet cadence of steps. At a corner, the light paused, showing a narrow area of wall and ground, then continued. A gate remained where it should be. A street held only the expected stillness. The patrol did not uncover a story. It preserved the absence of one, returning again and again to the ordinary state that allowed households to settle behind thin walls. Public order, in this setting, could be described without raised voices. It included noticing, directing, and keeping a routine through the hours of reduced activity. The watch facilities also belonged to neighborhood administration, so their work reached into the local management of town life as well as physical guarding. We should not assign a specific document or procedure to this one evening without evidence. Still, it is reasonable to understand the banya as a point where responsibilities gathered rather than as an empty structure beside a gate. Administrative life often left a quieter trace than ceremony. A duty was handed from one person to another. An item of equipment remained in its place. A route was known well enough to be walked without discussion. If a note or account was kept, its exact form lies beyond what we know of this evening, so we leave the page blank. What matters is the steadiness implied by the institution itself. Neighborhood care depended on repetition, and repetition could be almost invisible when it worked as intended. The same watchful routine included concern for fire and other disasters. Edo's built environment made prevention and readiness part of town administration, but there will be no dramatic blaze in our night. Kido and banya duties included disaster prevention and care for firefighting equipment as ordinary responsibilities. The equipment did not have to be used in order to matter. Its presence represented preparation, the quiet idea that tools should be kept available and that people should know where attention belonged. We will not invent a detailed inventory for this guardhouse. Firefighting equipment formed part of its responsibilities, but that does not mean every banya held precisely the same objects in precisely the same arrangement throughout the period. We can imagine only the general order of readiness, a designated place, useful things kept together, and a routine of checking that did not require alarm. Wood, cord, and other practical surfaces might catch the low lamplight, though the specific forms remain unstated. The calm lies in acknowledging the boundary as much as in filling the scene. Above or near such guard facilities, the fire lookout added height to the work of observation. Fire lookout towers associated with guardhouses were required during the Kyoho reforms in the 18th century. By the late Edo setting of our walk, that requirement belonged to an institution that had developed over time. A typical town could place a lookout among its gates, houses, and guard structures, allowing the tower to belong within a neighborhood rather than stand apart from it. From below, the lookout could be seen as a dark vertical shape against a slightly lighter sky. Its exact construction and height could vary, and the notes do not ask us to settle those details. The idea was simple enough. A higher position widened the field of attention beyond the nearest eaves. Watching from there joined the intimate scale of the guardhouse to the broader pattern of roofs, lanes, and distant points of light. On a calm night, the watcher might see little more than ordinary darkness resting where it belonged. The purpose of a lookout was serious, but seriousness did not require suspense. Prevention was often made from uneventful hours. Someone looked over the neighborhood and found no cause for alarm. Someone below kept the place in order. A patrol returned along the same route by which it had left. The gate and banya held their positions through the changing portions of night. This was the quiet success of routine, not an incident, but the continued absence of one. The wooden town around us seemed softer from this point of watch. Roofs overlapped. Narrow passages opened briefly between buildings. Lanterns appeared as small amber marks, each belonging to a household, a workplace, or a duty we could not identify. We did not assign a story to every light. We simply noticed how scattered they were, and how much darkness remained between them. The lookout's view, cautiously imagined, was less a panorama to conquer than a field to observe and then leave undisturbed. Below again, the guardhouse returned us to the scale of hands and footsteps. A person might sit, rise, listen, or move to the entrance. A patrol might begin or end. These actions are plausible rather than documented for a named night, so they remain quiet suggestions. The supported pattern was one of continued attention, movement controlled where needed, local order maintained, equipment kept for prevention, and the neighborhood watched through hours whose duration shifted with the season. Another distant bell could belong to another part of the expanding city, though we will not claim which one or how clearly it reached this street. More time bells appeared as Edo grew, allowing approximate hours to be communicated across a larger urban area. The sounds did not make all districts identical. They gave different listeners points of orientation within the same night. One bell might be near and rounded, another too far away to separate from the air, and another not heard here at all. The Hongokucho bell remained our clearest guide. Its history reached back to the move from Edo Castle in 1626, while the monthly fee paid by residents within earshot tied that long history to ordinary neighborhood contribution. In the late Edo period, an old institution could therefore be encountered through a simple sensory event. A tone crossed a roofline. A listener recognized an approximate hour. Then the sound faded, leaving the local routines of gate, guardhouse, patrol, and lookout to continue without announcement. As the next portion of darkness unfolded, we passed the gate without assigning it a universal closing time. The evidence allowed us to know its purposes more securely than its precise schedule on our imagined evening. It helped organize night traffic and stood near structures associated with watching and administration. Behind it, the street narrowed toward residences, where public oversight gave way to the smaller sounds of shared domestic life. The change was gradual. A guard's light remained behind, while household lights appeared closer to the ground. The city's ways of measuring and watching had brought us safely from the open bridge toward a row of modest homes. Time had been carried by a bell, adjusted through the seasons, and understood without one fixed modern hour. Order had been carried by people and places whose duties were repeated through the night, with differences across neighborhoods and across years. These systems were not perfect or identical, but in this calm passage they could be seen through their ordinary intention: to orient, to notice, to prepare, and to let the town continue resting. Ahead, a thin line of light rested beneath the edge of a Nagaya door, and the sounds beyond it were smaller than the bell and softer than the patrol steps. We will move toward that room without hurry, leaving the watch housed to its patient night. The next part of our journey is already folding itself into the warmth of a hearth, a water jar, and bedding waiting to be laid down. The line of light beneath the Nagaya door drew us gently away from the watch house and into the quieter part of the neighborhood. Behind us, the guard's lamp held its place near the gate, and the memory of the Hongo Kucho bell had faded into the ordinary spaces of night. Ahead, household sounds were smaller and closer to the ground. We followed them without trying to identify every voice or every movement, until the broader routines of bells, patrols, and lookout towers gave way to one modest room, and the simple work of preparing it for rest. Many commoners in Edo rented small units in Nagaya. A typical unit presented by the Edo Tokyo Museum offers a grounded pattern for such an ordinary rented space, not a claim that every tenant, every building, or every year looked precisely the same. Our room belongs to that pattern. We will allow its compact arrangement to guide us while leaving the imagined occupants unnamed, their ages, work, relationships, and private histories beyond what can safely be known. Nagaya could stand behind the more visible front streets. Merchant houses faced the public way, and entrances between shops could lead toward row houses at the rear. Moving inward, therefore, changed the scale of the city. The bright invitation of a shop front was left behind, followed by a passage toward homes that did not need to present goods to the street. Our walk had already made that change. The commercial width of Nihonbashi had narrowed through the gate and now narrowed again, until the night could be held within the span of one doorway. We can imagine the passage cautiously because the exact appearance of this one place is not known. A row of entrances might receive only a little light from lamps near the buildings. Roofs and walls would form close shapes, while the ground led from one small household threshold to the next. The quiet was shared rather than complete. A step nearby, a panel moving, or a low household murmur could travel farther here than it did beside the river. None of it needed to be loud. The closeness of the units made even ordinary sounds sufficient to show that neighbors were settling down on both sides. At our chosen door, the thin line of light widened as the entrance opened. We do not assign a face to the hand that moved it. An exact family would turn a supported arrangement into an invented biography, and that is not our purpose. Instead, we enter slowly, noticing first the relation between surfaces and objects. The threshold joined the outer passage to a dirt-floored entrance. Beyond that practical area lay the compact interior whose daytime order would soon be changed for sleep. The dirt-floored entrance also served as a kitchen, placing cooking work near the point where the household met the outside ground. We should not invent a particular meal, list ingredients, or assume that every evening followed the same sequence. Tonight, the day's cooking is already past. The entrance remains as a textured area beneath our attention, distinct from the compact interior beyond it, and its practical role can be understood without adding an unsupported bowl, pot, or recipe. The dirt floor did not reflect light in the same way as the surfaces around it. In our cautious imagining, it held a muted darkness around the objects placed there. A step crossing it might sound different from a step farther inside, though the exact materials of every adjoining surface remain unspecified. We stay with the supported distinction, a dirt-floored kitchen entrance and the small room it served. The threshold between them helped a limited area perform more than one kind of work over the course of a day. Within that entrance area stood a hearth, though we do not decide its precise shape for this evening or pretend to know how every tenant tended it. It was a fixed point among possessions that could be moved or folded away. By night, its strongest work could be finished. We might imagine only a subdued remainder of warmth and a low hearth glow, clearly held as an atmospheric possibility rather than a condition in every Nagaya room. That small possibility gave the room a restful center. Light near the hearth could soften the edges of the dirt floor, touch the side of the water jar, and leave the upper corners of the room in shadow. Nothing flashed or flared. There was no need to dramatize risk or turn the hearth into a warning. It belonged here as an ordinary domestic presence. In this calm night, we attend only to the way a household might have finished using it, allowing activity to diminish while useful objects return to stillness. A water jar stood within the unit. Its presence was simple and important, though we do not add a story about where this evening's water came from or who carried it. The jar occupied space in a room where space mattered. It could not be folded like cloth or shifted as lightly as an empty wrapping. It remained part of the kitchen arrangement, a rounded, quiet form beside the other necessities of the household. In low light, its surface might show one softened reflection and then become dark again as the lamp moved. Our attention could travel slowly around that rounded edge and back toward the hearth, tracing the few fixed points of the room before coming to rest on the open floor. The distance was not great, yet each object gave it another measure. One step might cross the dirt floor of the entrance, another reached the compact interior, and a hand could find the jar without searching through darkness. These movements remain imagined rather than assigned to a particular tenant. They simply help the compact arrangement settle gently around us, object by object, until the room feels quiet enough to breathe with. The room did not contain a closet. That absence helps explain why storage appeared in other forms and why the living area had to remain adaptable. A modern visitor might expect possessions to disappear behind a built-in door, but in this typical unit, there was no such separate recess. Household things were kept in containers or wrappers and arranged within the same limited interior where people worked, sat, and later slept. The room's order was therefore visible, made through folding, tying, stacking, and placing rather than through hiding everything behind a wall. Wicker boxes provided one supported form of storage. We do not need to fill them with specific garments, tools, or personal keepsakes. Their importance here is spatial. A box gave smaller possessions an edge and a place. It allowed several loose things to become one manageable object that could be shifted when the room changed purpose. The woven surface, cautiously imagined under the low light, would appear different from the smoother water jar and the plain planes of partition and floor. Each texture belonged to an arrangement where usefulness and compactness met. Furoshiki offered another way of gathering household goods in a unit without a closet. Cloth could hold objects together, then be tied and placed aside. The exact contents and patterns are not ours to invent. We can notice the gesture instead, cloth gathered around the objects, holding them in a bundle that became easier to move. When floor space was needed, the wrapped things could wait at the edge of the room, contained without requiring a separate piece of built-in storage. The wicker boxes in furoshiki did not make the household empty. They made its belongings adjustable to the room. At one part of the day, an item could be close at hand. Later, it could be returned to a box or gathered into cloth so the same area could serve another need. This was a practical response to limited space, not a universal ritual performed identically by every tenant. In our room, the movement happened slowly. A bundle rested beside a box, and the center of the floor opened by a little more. There was a quiet intelligence in such use of space. The room did not need to become larger in order to change. It became a place for a new activity because objects were moved, bedding was unfolded, and the available area was understood through habit. We should not romanticize smallness or claim that every resident found it comfortable. Renting a compact unit placed real limits on storage and privacy. Yet the arrangement shows the practical methods by which people could make a single interior answer several needs from morning through night. During waking hours, futon bedding was put aside to preserve living space. This supported detail gives the room a rhythm without requiring an exact timetable. Bedding that occupied the floor during sleep could not remain spread there if the same area was needed for other parts of daily life. So it was folded or gathered out of the way. In a unit with no closet, it remained part of the visible household order, placed where the limited room could still be used. Now, as the night deepened, that order began to reverse. The work of the day had contracted. Goods in boxes or cloth waited near the wall. The dirt-floored entrance and hearth no longer held active cooking. The center of the room could be given over to rest. Futon bedding was brought from where it had been put aside, not as a ceremonial object, but as the familiar means by which living space became sleeping space. We do not need to say who unfolded it. The room can remain free of an invented family, while the action itself stays clear. One edge was released. The folded bedding became wider and lower. A hand, unnamed and only gently imagined, could smooth a surface and adjust its position within the available area. The change was quiet enough to be heard in cloth rather than speech. With each fold opened, the room's purpose shifted from evening arrangement towards sleep. The futon had been put aside during the day, though we do not supply every layer, color, or fabric for our scene. We leave those details soft. The bedding was simply spread where space had been cleared. Its shape lay close to the floor, surrounded by the few forms that remained upright. The water jar, the hearth, a wicker box, a tied furoshiki. Nothing had disappeared. The household had been rearranged around the need to lie down. In this way, the absence of a closet and the practice of putting bedding aside belonged to the same spatial story. Storage was not separate from living. Sleep was not assigned a room that remained and used through the day. This typical Nagaya unit gathered those functions into one compact arrangement. We should not assume that every commoner's home worked in exactly this fashion, but here the pattern felt tangible. A few objects changed position, and the available floor quietly changed meaning. Thin partitions separated this unit from the next, though nothing tells us exactly what was heard on one particular night. The walls divided households physically while allowing us to imagine a degree of audible closeness. A voice on the other side might become a low murmur. Folded bedding could make a soft movement. A small object might be placed down and then leave no further sound. We keep those neighbor sounds modest and uncertain. They are not a transcript of real tenants, and we do not assign them names or family roles. They are the likely textures of adjacent rooms separated by thin material, presented as possibilities. One neighbor could still be arranging possessions. Another unit might already have grown still. Farther along the row, a door could slide and settle. The sounds did not combine into a conversation for us to follow. They formed a soft boundary between solitude and shared habitation. The partition carried both separation and reminder. On our side was the water jar, the hearth, the boxes, the cloth bundles, and the bedding now spread for sleep. On the other side was another household whose arrangement might resemble this one in some ways and differ in others. We should not use one typical room to erase those differences. Renters brought varied work, circumstances, possessions, and relationships into Nagaya life. The physical frame could be familiar while the lives unfolding within it remained distinct. The shared sounds also placed the room within a row rather than allowing it to become an isolated cottage. Beyond one thin partition lay another unit. Beyond that, perhaps another, though the exact number and plan of our imagined building are not specified. The passage outside connected their doors. Entrances between front street shops connected rear housing to the larger town. Even while lying down in a small interior, a tenant remained within layers of neighborhood space, from bedding to room to row, row to street, and street to the bells and gates beyond. The Hongo Kucho bell had nearly vanished from our attention, yet the system of unequal hours continued outside. Darkness was still divided into its seasonal portions, each longer or shorter according to the time of year. Inside the Nagaya, those portions did not need to be calculated. The changing hour could be felt through the completion of tasks and the spreading of bedding. Public time had reached the neighborhood as sound. Household time now appeared through cloth unfolding across a cleared floor. The guardhouse, too, remained part of the town beyond the room. A patrol might pass somewhere outside, though we do not insist that one did at this moment. If footsteps came through the passage, they could belong to many ordinary movements. The watch facilities had guided us toward the residential quarter, but here their broader duties receded. The thin partition and small domestic sounds became more immediate than gates, traffic control, or fire lookout. The scale of attention had moved indoors and settled close to the earth. We can pause beside the dirt-floored entrance and take in the arrangement without touching it. Careful looking turns general words like small room and commoner housing into a relation among practical things. The hearth was near the entrance that served as a kitchen. The water jar occupied its place. Storage relied on wicker boxes and furoshiki because there was no closet. Bedding preserved daytime space by waiting folded until the room was ready for sleep. The arrangement does not preserve one actual evening, and our narration adds its own layer of distance. We have imagined a late Edo night within a grounded physical pattern, keeping the uncertain movements soft at the edges. We can hear possible neighbors without pretending to quote them. We can see possible hands unfolding a futon without inventing a biography. We can feel the room's compactness without declaring that all households experienced it in the same way. The remaining light seemed to lower as the household objects became still. A wicker box made a quiet rectangular shadow. A tied cloth bundle rested beside it. its contents unknown and unneeded. The water jar held no movement that we could see. At the hearth, the imagined glow had become small and even. These were not treasures arranged for display. They were useful things left in their proper relation, while the cleared part of the room accepted bedding and the night accepted the room. Through the partition came one last gentle sequence of sounds. Cloth shifted. A low voice ended. Something light touched the floor, and then the neighboring unit rested in near silence. We do not know whether anyone there was already asleep. The thinness of the division allows us to imagine this closeness, while the exact life beyond it remains private. That privacy can stay intact. We listen only long enough to notice the nearness, then let our attention return to the breathing quiet on this side. The futon now lay fully spread. The room had completed its slow change from the place of daytime living to the place of sleep, though no single instant marked the transformation. It happened through a series of small adjustments. Goods contained, bundles moved, floor cleared, bedding unfolded. The dirt entrance remained a kitchen area even when its work was done. The storage remained visible even when nothing more was needed. The same limited interior held the memory of one purpose while settling into another. There was no need to make the room stand for all of Edo. It was enough that this typical unit offered a grounded example of how many commoners' rented Nagaya spaces could be arranged. The smallness, the lack of a closet, the movable storage, the put-aside futon, and the thin partitions belonged to that example. Around those facts, our imagined night stayed deliberately plain. No crisis entered. No invented household story demanded an ending. The room simply became ready for rest. We remained for a little while longer as even the tiny sounds began to separate. A faint movement came from beyond the partition, then stopped. The old bell was no more than a memory behind several rows of roofs. The hearth held its lowest glow. The water jar stood where it had stood, and folded household things waited quietly at the edge of the bedding. Outside, the narrow passage and the lanterns beyond it could wait until we were ready to continue. For now, let the imagined hearth glow settle into a quiet red warmth while the thin partition holds the last soft sound of a neighbor preparing for sleep. Let the water jar, wicker box, and tide cloth remain still beside the futon spread across the cleared room. There is no hurry to rise, and when we do, we will step softly from this warm interior toward the cooler passage and its waiting lantern. There is no hurry at all as we leave the small room in the Nagaya. Behind us, the imagined hearth glow has settled into a quiet red warmth. The water jar stands where it stood, and the folded things of the household wait in their corner. A thin partition holds the soft sounds of a neighbor preparing for sleep. We step from the dirt-floored doorway into the narrow passage beyond, carrying nothing with us except the calm of that modest room. The night air feels cooler here. A lantern hangs under an eave, its shade turning one small patch of wall the color of old honey. The passage leads toward a front street, though we do not need to walk all the way into its broader light. Edo was arranged in layers of frontage and depth. Merchants occupied houses facing the principal street, while entrances between those houses opened toward the road dwellings behind. Shops lined the road, narrow ways passed between them, and the more crowded homes stood farther back. Goods did not remain at the bright edge of the neighborhood. Peddlers moved through those openings, carrying ordinary things toward the people who lived beyond the storefronts. By day, the larger street had held a steady traffic of voices, sandals, goods, and deliveries. Now many shutters were drawn, and the lines of the buildings had become simple dark plains beneath their roofs. A little light escaped around a door that had not yet been closed. Another lamp rested beside a threshold while someone completed the last small task of business. Beyond that glow, the street softened quickly into shadow. The city had not vanished, but it had changed its scale. It could be measured now by one lamp, one doorway, one passing voice at a time. Edo's street trade was remarkably varied. Peddlers carried ordinary goods through the streets, while medicine vendors and book lenders also entered the lanes that led to the back row houses. Their routes brought part of the city's commerce close to home, even for residents whose rooms were far from an impressive shopfront. We can imagine the pattern without giving it too much noise. A familiar call heard from the lane, a door sliding open, a neighbor leaning out, a brief exchange conducted beneath an eave, and then the slow retreat of footsteps. Some sellers carried much of their trade with them rather than waiting in a permanent shop. The exact arrangement varied with the seller and the goods, and surviving images often composed the city into scenes rather than preserving it like a modern photograph. Still, the repeated figure of the mobile vendor belongs naturally to Edo's streets. A livelihood could move at walking pace. It could pause beside a gate, wait near the mouth of an alley, and continue after a few words and the small sound of coins. This movement joined the front of the neighborhood to its quieter interior. The compact Nagaya room we left had no closet, and its household things waited in a wicker box, wrapped in cloth, or placed neatly beside the bedding. The peddlers passing brought the wider market close for a moment. Useful objects, remedies, reading material, and other ordinary goods could all circulate through spaces that seemed, at first glance, tucked away from commerce. Tonight, we follow the lanterns rather than the loudest road. They stand at irregular distances, some fixed to buildings, and some carried by people moving carefully over the ground. Their light is limited and gentle. It reveals a sleeve, the rim of a basket, or the grain of a wooden post, then leaves the rest to the darkness. A seller slows at an entrance between two merchant houses. Someone recognizes the call, and a small conversation begins. Among the people moving through such streets were book lenders. Publishing had developed greatly during the Edo period, and popular books and woodblock pictures formed part of common urban entertainment. The city's literary culture was not confined to heavy scholarly volumes or to the shelves of a wealthy household. There were works of light fiction, illustrated stories, maps, textbooks, and separate images. Shops sold them, while lenders carried reading material from place to place, allowing a book to pass through many hands. We may picture one of these lenders pausing near the lane, though the details of this particular evening must remain imagined. His bundle or case is handled with care. The edges of paper dislike damp, and the covers have already known many fingers. A resident returns one volume and receives another. Perhaps the exchange is discussed in a few low sentences. Perhaps a child, not quite asleep, looks from within the doorway at the pictures before the book is tucked away. The lender then moves on, and the story he has delivered remains behind in the narrow room. The economy of lending suited a city in which space could be scarce and possessions carefully arranged. A borrowed book needed no permanent shelf. It could lie beside a lamp for several evenings, be read aloud, be examined for its illustrations, and then continue to another household. This is an inference from the presence of book lenders rather than a rule for every reader, but it gives us a quiet way to understand circulation. The physical copy traveled, and with it traveled scenes, jokes, news, familiar characters, distant roads, and remembered places. The light required for reading was modest. A small lamp created a bright center and a wide border of dimness. On the page, black lines held their shape while the paper took on the amber color of the room. The reader moved the book nearer. A companion listened. A pause came when the light needed attention. Outside, the lender's steps grew softer, then disappeared among other steps. Inside, the published pages made their own small chamber within the chamber, a place reached without leaving the room. Edo's bookshops offered many kinds of material. Popular fiction and images could sit beside scholarly books, maps, and textbooks, giving readers more than one reason to pause at a shop or receive a lender at the lane. The range matters more to us than any single title. It suggests a street culture in which practical information and amusement, learning and pictures could rest near one another beneath the same roof and then travel outward through the city. Each kind of page offered a different quiet possibility. A map might be opened only far enough to follow one road. A textbook could wait for the concentration of daylight. A work of light fiction might remain beside a lamp, while an illustrated image held someone's attention for a few breaths longer. These are imagined moments, not the routine of every reader, but the variety itself is grounded. Knowledge, direction, amusement, and pictures all had places within the publishing life of Edo. Affordable woodblock images had a different ease of movement. They could be displayed in a shop, carried home, passed along, or placed where their colors gave life to a plain interior. We should not treat surviving pictures as exact windows onto one ordinary night. Artists arranged recognizable places and customs into balanced views, choosing what to show and how to guide the eye. Yet the survival of so many published scenes belongs to the same flourishing world of popular books and images that entertain the townspeople of Edo. A woodblock picture seen in lamplight would not have shone as it does beneath the even illumination of a modern gallery. Its colors would have emerged slowly. A blue robe, a dark roofline, a pale face, or the curve of a bridge might appear first, while finer marks waited nearer the flame. The paper could bend slightly in the hand. The carved lines remained steady while the light trembled. Then the image was lowered, and the surrounding room returned, small and familiar, with sandals at the entrance and bedding waiting to be spread. Outside again, our path turns away from the front street. Many night stalls stood away from those main roads, in open areas such as fire breaks and in amusement districts where people gathered. This makes the night market feel less like one continuous avenue and more like a scattering of warm islands. A narrow lane opens into a broader piece of ground. The buildings step back. Above, there is more sky. Beneath it, several stalls hold their lanterns low, and small groups stand without blocking the way. Some yatai were portable, while others remained set up at a fixed spot in the street. In late Edo, these food stalls often appeared at night away from the front streets, serving people who had gathered in the open areas around them. They belonged to movement rather than a formal meal. A pause during an evening outside, a little warmth before the walk home, a brief meeting beneath paper lanterns, and then another figure continuing into the dark. We will not turn the evening into a feast. Food is only one thread in the street economy, alongside books, woodblock pictures, medicine vendors, and peddlers carrying ordinary goods. We might imagine a little steam rising while a vendor works in a narrow space with practiced motions. Nearby customers could pause, exchange a few words, and then make room for the next person. The city continues around them at a restful pace. The particular foods remain unnamed in our walk. What matters is the small scale of the exchange and the way a night stall joined trade with evening gathering. A person approached the lantern, received something light to eat, and soon made room for someone else, though this sequence remains imagined rather than fixed to one known evening. For our quieter street, we keep only that modest rhythm, a brief pause, a small light, and people lingering for a little while outdoors. One stall seems almost contained within its lantern glow. The wooden frame is plain. A hanging cloth stirs when someone passes. Steam rises, loses its shape, and becomes part of the cool air. A customer warms both hands around a bowl for a moment before beginning. Nearby, another person waits without impatience. The sounds are close and ordinary. The faint contact of wood and pottery, the murmur of an order, the soft scrape of sandals adjusting on the ground. The open ground around the stalls has its own usefulness. Open areas identified as fire breaks were among the places where people gathered and yatai appeared at night. A temporary stall could occupy the edge without needing the frontage of a permanent shop. When the trading was done, a portable arrangement could be packed again. The architecture of commerce was therefore sometimes modest and temporary, assembled for a few hours beneath a lantern in the dark sky. There was a rhythm to setting out and putting away. We do not know the exact routine of every vendor, so we let the surviving descriptions guide us gently. A carried stall had to remain compact enough to move. A fixed stall had to fit the space allowed to it. Utensils and stock stayed within reach. Light had to be protected from a passing breeze. The vendor knew where each thing belonged because the working area was small and because night rewarded calm, economical movements. Around these islands of trade, neighbors encountered one another without arranging a visit. Someone returning from work stopped briefly beside someone who had only stepped out from a nearby lane. A book lender might cross paths with a food seller. A peddler may already have finished a route, while a medicine vendor could continue toward another block. These meetings need not have produced important events. Their value was in repetition. A city became familiar through faces seen often, calls recognized at a distance, and routes followed until the feet knew them. The inexpensive and the reusable belonged naturally together. A borrowed book could serve another reader. A woodblock picture could bring a composed view of Edo into a plain room. A light meal could be prepared in a portable stall that had arrived from elsewhere. Each exchange made use of limited space and movable things. The night street did not require grand halls or deep warehouses to feel abundant. Its richness lay in circulation. Behind the shops and stalls were much larger networks, though they remained almost invisible from this lane. Cargo vessels carried daily necessities from the Osaka region to Edo, including cotton, oil, and paper. By the time one of those items reached a peddler or a bookshop shelf, it had passed through hands and distances we cannot see tonight. The small exchange beneath the lantern was the final, intimate point in a much longer journey. Paper is a particularly quiet companion through this chapter. It appears in the walls and shades around us, in books and pictures, in wrapping, and in the lantern that makes trade possible after dusk. Cotton and oil also traveled to Edo within the same broad cargo networks, though we do not assign either one to a particular object in this lane. Commerce settles instead into ordinary textures: a sleeve against the wrist, a page beneath the fingers, a shade glowing above a stall. The lanterns do not erase the darkness. They divide it into soft intervals. Between one stall and the next, we walk beneath an open stretch of night. Behind us, conversation grows indistinct. Ahead, another light shows a vendor closing a box. The limited illumination keeps attention near. There is no need to take in the whole city at once. Edo can remain immense beyond our sight, while this one side street offers only a few yards of wooden walls, packed ground, and amber air. A book lender may be finishing the last part of his route. The remaining volumes feel heavier now. not because their weight has changed, but because the night has lengthened. He passes an entrance to the back dwellings and recognizes that no lamp is showing there. He continues without calling. At another doorway, someone is still awake, and a return is made in a whisper. The case closes. The lender bows, turns, and carries the unread pages onward. At the stalls, the flow has thinned. The busiest moment is over, if there was a busy moment at all. One customer leaves with measured steps. The vendor wipes a small surface and places an object back in its proper corner. What remains will be packed or covered. A portable stall will once again become a load balanced for walking. A fixed one will grow dark until another evening. Trade ends not with a bell or announcement, but with a gradual reduction of light. Farther along, an inexpensive woodblock picture hangs where a lamp catches only part of it. Perhaps it shows a familiar place, perhaps a traveler, perhaps an actor or a season. We do not need to decide. Its presence is enough. It reminds us that Edo's residents could look at their own city through the shaping hand of an artist, recognizing a bridge, a street, or a custom, while also enjoying the careful arrangement of the scene. The ordinary world became an image, and the image returned to the ordinary world in a shop or room. This gentle commerce also carried information and entertainment through books and images. Tonight, however, we let any urgent pages remain closed. We stay with the quieter material already present in the city's publishing world, a map, a textbook waiting for daylight, a work of light fiction set beside a pillow, an illustrated image rolled or laid flat. Information rests as easily as any sleeping household when no one is reading it. We turn once more toward the lane of row houses. The contrast is soft rather than sharp. A stall can be heard behind us, and a domestic lamp appears ahead. Commerce and home are separated by only a short walk, sometimes only by the depth of a merchant's lot. The person who sold something in the open space may live in a room much like the one we left. The person who borrowed a book may return it on another evening. The street and the household continually exchange objects, stories, money, and familiar greetings. For a moment, we pause beneath the eave where the lane narrows. The wood above us might hold a little of the day's fading warmth. The air might carry a trace of smoke and cooked food, then clear. No single sound dominates. There could be a cough behind a shutter, a footstep at the end of the passage, or the whisper of something light touched by a breeze. Each sound appears, remains briefly, and settles away. The side street has shown us a city that stayed awake in modest ways. It did not need the full brightness of the main road. It needed only people who knew their routes, residents who listened for familiar calls, readers ready to exchange one volume for another, and vendors willing to unfold a little workplace beneath a lantern. The result was not spectacle. It was access to necessities, to small comforts, to pictures and stories, and to the company of others for a few minutes before sleep. Now the last seller begins to lower a lantern. Its circle of amber light slips down the wooden post and grows smaller on the ground. Beyond the roofs, the night remains wide and blue-black. We leave the side street quietly, while one final page is turned behind a thin wall, and the city breathes at an even, unhurried pace. There is no hurry as we leave the last lantern on the side street. Its small amber circle fades behind us, while the lane ahead grows cooler and more open. The walls draw back by degrees. The roofs no longer seem to meet above the road, and a darker breadth of sky appears between them. Somewhere beyond the final houses, the city has an edge made not of gates or timber, but of water. We walk toward it quietly, carrying the even rhythm of the closed stalls and sleeping rooms with us. The way to the river is not entirely dark. A lamp remains beside one doorway, another moves in the hand of a late pedestrian, and another hangs farther ahead where a road turns. Yet the lights become fewer as the open air increases. Their glow no longer rests only on plaster, shutters, or packed earth. It reaches into empty space. At first, the river announces itself as a change in the night, a broad coolness beyond the buildings, and then as a muted surface holding the faintest traces of light. We have come to the Sumida, the river crossed here by Ryogoku Bridge. Ryogoku was a major landmark, familiar enough to appear as the subject and setting of a Hiroshige image. In our late Edo evening, broadly placed in the first half of the 19th century, the bridge belongs to the shared geography of the city. It joins one bank to the other, but it also gives people a place from which to pause, look across the water, and feel the size of the night. By this late hour, traffic on the bridge has thinned. The earlier movement has loosened into separate figures, each given a little more room. A person carrying a lantern crosses at an unhurried pace. Two others walk near enough to speak without raising their voices. Someone stops briefly where the view opens along the river, then continues. The exact people of this evening are imagined, but the gradual quieting is a gentle way to enter the scene preserved by art. A known bridge, covered recreational boats, and the moon above the Sumida. Hiroshige's work is titled Twilight Moon at Ryogoku Bridge. The title holds an earlier hour softly, neither full day nor settled darkness, with the moon present while the last light of the sky has not entirely gone. Our walk has arrived later, after the side street stalls began to close, but the bridge, boats, and moon remain recognizable. The surviving artwork presents these elements as a carefully composed view. It does not preserve a single evening with the exactness of a modern photograph, yet it shows that the place and the practice were familiar to the people for whom the image was made. We therefore take the artwork as a guide rather than a window we can open without caution. It tells us that Ryogoku mattered, that covered pleasure boats belonged to the river's recreational life, and that moonlight could frame the bridge in a familiar way. It does not tell us the name of each passenger, the words spoken beneath every roof, or the precise sound of each oar. Those smaller details remain quiet possibilities. We let them appear only as possibilities, lightly held within the larger forms that history preserves. The Sumida looks broader now that the houses no longer contain our view. Along a side street, darkness gathered in doorways and under eaves. Here it spreads across the water in one continuous field. The river does not become black. It keeps many shades. Deep blue where it reflects the sky, warmer brown near a lantern, pale gray where a small ripple lifts toward the moonlight. None of these colors stays fixed. The surface rearranges them with every slow movement. From the bridge, a lantern seems to have two lives. One hangs above the walkway, close enough to reveal the hand or sleeve beside it. The other lengthens on the water below, no longer round, no longer steady. A slight current draws it into a wavering line. A passing boat divides the line, and for a moment there are several lights where there had been one. Then the fragments return to darkness, while the lantern above remains small and intact. More lights appear along the river. Some may belong to the banks, some to people on the bridge, and some to boats moving below. We do not need to assign every reflection to its origin. The uncertainty is part of the calm. A glow approaches, widens, and recedes. Another trembles in place until the surface shifts beneath it. From above, the pattern resembles a loose trail that the water makes and unmakes, leading nowhere, asking no one to follow. The bridge carries sound differently from the narrow lanes. Footsteps that had been absorbed by walls now meet the open air. They are audible for a few paces and then disperse. A low conversation passes behind us. From the river comes the measured disturbance of a boat moving through water. We might hear would settle or enter and leave the current, though nothing can preserve the exact sound of this imagined night. The broad space softens everything before it reaches us. Below, a covered boat moves slowly into clearer view. Covered pleasure boats appear in Hiroshige's image as part of middle-class recreation. What survives is enough for our quiet view. A sheltered space carried along the river, passengers within, and the city seen from a moving platform rather than from the bridge or bank. We do not need a more specific name or type for the boat to follow its gentle passage beneath Ryogoku. The covering gives the boat a compact silhouette in the dim light. A nearby lantern might create a warm patch that seems to travel with it. The passengers cannot all be seen clearly. Perhaps a sleeve catches the glow, or a seated figure shifts nearer an opening. Such details are suggestions rather than documented facts, and they fade almost as soon as they are noticed. The boat remains most clearly itself as a dark, quiet shelter on the water. Inside a covered recreational boat, the river would have been experienced through a frame. The roof limited the sky, while an opening offered a changing view of bridge timbers, bank lights, and reflections. The scene moved even when the passengers sat still. A lantern onshore slipped behind a post. The bridge approached, passed above, and receded. A patch of moonlit water became a darker patch beneath the span. This sense of slow movement is an inference, but it follows gently from the presence of roofed boats upon a flowing river. The passengers belong to the urban world we have already crossed. They were not removed from the shops, row houses, book lenders, or evening stalls. These pleasure boats were associated with middle-class recreation, placing leisure within the life of Edo's townspeople. A person who spent the day attending to trade or craft might also know the river as a place of rest. A city of work could make room for a few hours of looking, talking softly, and watching the moon take its place above the bridge. Another boat remains farther from us, its covering only a low mark against the water. It does not seem to hurry toward any destination. Recreational movement can be slow because arrival is not the only purpose. The passage itself matters. The changing air, the widening view, the water beneath the hull, and the company within the covered space. The boats in Hiroshige's scene allow us to imagine that the river was not merely crossed. It could be occupied for a time, as calmly as a room, though the floor beneath it moved. Ryogoku Bridge offered the same scene from a more stable place. People could stand above the current and wait. Waiting for the moon was an established practice in Edo's culture of evening gathering, recognizable enough to appear in surviving images. It did not require constant entertainment. The gradual alteration of the sky provided the shape of the occasion. People might arrive while there was still light, watch the colors cool, and allow the moon to become clearer as the surroundings darkened. To wait for the moon is to accept a pace set elsewhere. No person on the bridge can make it rise faster. No lantern can replace it. Conversation may fill some of the interval, and silence may fill the rest. The river continues beneath both. A covered boat drifts into a better position for viewing, or so the scene might suggest. On the walkway, a few figures turn their attention toward the same portion of sky. For a while, many separate evenings share one slow expectation. The moon does not need a dramatic entrance. Earlier, it may have been only a pale presence within twilight, easy to overlook while the western sky was still luminous. Since then, the sky has deepened around it. The disk seems clearer, though it has continued its quiet course. Rooflines have grown darker. The faces of people on the bridge are less distinct. On the Sumida, a narrow brightness gathers wherever the moving surface catches the light. This reflected moon is different from the lanterns. A lantern makes a local mark, warm and close, attached to a human route. Moonlight spreads without selecting one boat or one section of bank. It lies faintly across a much larger part of the river. The current breaks it into countless small surfaces. Some brighten, some turn away, and some vanish beneath the shadow of the bridge. From one breath to the next, the pattern changes while the moon above remains serene. The people waiting do not have to agree on the precise moment when waiting has ended. One person may feel satisfied as soon as the moon clears a roofline. Another remains until its reflection strengthens. A group on a boat may continue along the river with the view changing around them. The practice can be understood without making every gathering identical. Customs varied with season, place, company, and circumstance. What survives for us is the calm outline of an activity. People gave part of an evening to the sky. The artwork gathers bridge, moon, boats, and water into a balanced image, but our walk can move through them one at a time. We rest our attention first on the bridge beneath our feet, then on a covered boat passing below, then on the pale sky beyond it. This slower looking prevents the scene from becoming crowded. It also respects the difference between art and evidence. Hiroshige arranged a recognizable world for viewers, and we receive it as an arrangement, not as an inventory of every object present. Along the walkway, the remaining pedestrians leave generous spaces between them. A lantern passes, making the rail or edge visible for a moment. Then the light moves on and the bridge returns to moonlit shadow. We do not claim that every evening at Ryogoku became quiet in this way. The crossing could be busy, and the surrounding river life could be lively. Tonight's thinning traffic belongs to our chosen hour and our gentle passage, a plausible stilling within a place known for movement and recreation. The bridge is large enough in the city's imagination to serve as more than background. A landmark helps people orient themselves, not only on maps, but within memory. One might recall the view from a particular side, the shape of boats below, or the moon seen during a previous season. We cannot recover those individual recollections, yet the repeated artistic attention to Ryogoku suggests a place widely recognized. Standing here, a resident of Edo could feel both located and connected, held over the river between familiar banks. The Sumida carries the eye away from the bridge. Upstream and downstream, the water enters darkness gradually. A distant boat is reduced to one warm point. A bank becomes a low line beneath the sky. The city remains present, but its details are hidden. This is the opposite of the side street, where each lamp revealed a few intimate objects. The river offers fewer objects and greater distance. It invites the mind to loosen its hold on doors, stalls, pages, and coins. Another covered pleasure boat passes beneath the broad night sky. We do not assume that every covered boat had the same form or purpose. Surviving evidence supports these recreational boats in association with middle-class leisure. Beyond that, arrangements could have varied. This one seems quiet from our place on the bridge. A nearby reflection remains close to the hull, rising and falling with the smallest disturbance, then stretching briefly as the boat turns. Perhaps those aboard are also looking upward. Perhaps they have grown silent because the moon has become clearer. These are possibilities, not claims fixed in the artwork. Yet they fit the known practice of going out to wait for the moon and the known presence of pleasure boats at Ryogoku. We need no elaborate scene within the covering. A few seated forms, a little lamplight, and a shared view of the river are enough to carry the imagination without making it wakeful. Waiting would feel slightly different from each place around the river. On the bridge, a watcher stood above the current and saw boats pass through the scene. From the bank, the bridge itself became part of the view, a dark line carrying small lights from one side to the other. From a covered boat, both banks changed position while the moon remained high beyond them. These differences are simple inferences from the known setting, not a description of one particular gathering. They help us understand why people could return to the same landmark and still receive a different evening. A step along the bridge altered the angle of the reflection. A boat's slow progress changed the arrangement of roofs and sky. Even remaining still allowed the Sumida to remake the picture below. Waiting was therefore not empty time. It was a patient attention to changes so gradual that they asked almost nothing of the mind. The meeting of artificial light and moonlight gives the river two temperatures. The lanterns are amber, close to wood, cloth, hands, and faces. The moon is pale, spread across sky and current. Where the two reflections overlap, the colors do not remain separate for long. A ripple draws them together and then apart. Warm light breaks into cool water. Cool light passes beside the boat. The Sumida keeps neither image, yet it receives them over and over. As the late hour settles more fully around the bridge, some watchers begin to leave. There is no signal that dismisses them all. One pair turns toward the bank. A solitary figure resumes the crossing. A boat continues along the river, while another seems to remain near the bridge. The gathering thins by quiet decisions. Those who depart carry no object from the occasion, only the memory of having stood still while the sky changed. The bridge grows calmer after each set of footsteps fades. We remain a little longer. The moon now appears settled into the night, though of course it continues its course. Its light traces the upper edge of a ripple, touches the roof of a covered boat, and leaves the deeper water dark. Beneath us, the current proceeds without display. It had moved before anyone arrived to watch, and it will move after the last lantern has gone. Time in Edo was not divided by the identical clock hours familiar today. Daylight and darkness were each divided into 6 portions, so the length of an hour changed with the season. We do not attach this river scene to one exact modern time. It is enough to know that twilight has passed, the night has deepened, and the hours before dawn still lie ahead. The moon and the changing activity of the bridge offer gentler signs than a minute hand could provide. Somewhere within the city, a bell of time will continue to mark an approximate hour for those within hearing, as the bells had done through Edo's long development. From the river, its sound might reach clearly, faintly, or not at all, depending on distance and the night air. We do not need to hear it now. The water gives its own measure. The interval between one boat and the next, the widening distance of a departing lantern, and the repeated arrival of ripples beneath the bridge. The last covered boat in our view becomes a dark form beyond the strongest reflection. For a while a light near it remains visible. Then the glow diminishes until it could be mistaken for a lamp on the far bank. The distinction no longer matters. Boat, bank, bridge, and city settle into the same blue-black quiet, while the moon preserves a pale path across the Sumida. We begin to turn back toward the streets, not yet toward morning, but toward the long calm interval that comes before it. Nihonbashi waits elsewhere in the sleeping city, and in time the earliest movement will return to its bridge and nearby market. For now, Ryogoku remains behind us under the moon, its lanterns few, its footsteps light, and its river moving steadily through the dark. The night has many breaths left before dawn. Moonlight loosens on the water, gathers again, and drifts beyond the bridge. We walk on slowly, while the quiet hours open ahead. The quiet hours remain open before us as we leave the moonlit Sumida behind. Ryogoku Bridge recedes into the blue-black distance, its last covered boat reduced to a small moving shadow, and its lantern to a point that might belong to water or bank. We return to the sleeping streets without urgency. The moon still gives enough light to soften the roofs, while the lamps along our path have grown fewer. Somewhere ahead, Nihonbashi waits in the same city, though it will not look exactly as it did when evening first gathered around us. Between one bridge and the other, the night has changed by degrees too small to notice separately. A lamp has been lowered. A doorway that once held a line of light has gone dark. The air has cooled, and the spaces between footsteps have lengthened. Yet the darkness is no longer deepening. It has reached its quietest breadth and now seems to rest. We have entered the long interval in which night remains night, while the first routines of another day begin before daylight is clearly visible. It would be misleading to attach one exact modern hour to this return. Edo used a system of unequal temporal hours. Daylight from sunrise to sunset was divided into 6 portions, and darkness from sunset to sunrise was also divided into 6. Because the length of day and night changed with the season, the portions changed as well. A named hour, therefore, did not occupy one fixed span on a modern clock throughout the year. The city's time stretched and narrowed with the light. Reference material concerning the familiar phrase about leaving Nihonbashi at 7 places that named hour in the pre-dawn part of the old system. We can use it as a gentle marker without translating it into one universal number of minutes after midnight. Depending on the season, its relation to our clocks would not remain constant. What matters in this walk is its position within the night, late enough that darkness has thinned in meaning, even if it still appears broad to the eye, and early enough that the working day has not yet fully opened. The bell of time at Hongokucho helped people within hearing know an approximate hour. Historical accounts say the original bell was moved from Edo Castle to a site in Nihonbashi Hongokucho in 1626, and that additional bells appeared as the city expanded. By our late Edo setting, such timekeeping had developed across generations. The bell did not make the seasonal hours equal. It gave audible form to a system that still followed the changing division of daylight and darkness. Perhaps a bell reaches us now, though this particular hearing must remain imagined. It would travel differently through each street, clearer in one opening, softened behind a row of buildings, and almost lost where distance intervened. We do not need to count the strokes. The low resonance can remain part of the atmosphere, a sound that seems to hang for a moment and then withdraw. A person already awake might recognize what it signified without needing a small numbered face or a hand moving around a dial. As we continue, the city offers other measures. The moon has shifted from its earlier place above Ryogoku. A few lamps that burn through part of the night are dimmer. At one threshold, a new light has appeared. It does not announce morning to the whole neighborhood. It belongs to one person beginning one task. Farther on, another door moves quietly, and a figure steps into the street. The first activity gathers as scattered points, much as the night's lanterns gathered, but now the direction of change has reversed. Not every household wakes together, and no universal sequence governed them all. In the Nagaya we visited, bedding may still cover most of the floor, and the water jar may remain untouched beside the hearth. Somewhere else, someone could already be preparing to leave. A gatekeeper or watchman may still be attending to familiar duties of neighborhood administration. The city holds sleep and waking at once, separated not by a sharp line but by walls, roles, distances, and individual need. We pass a familiar kind of side lane. The night stalls may have been packed or darkened. A fixed yatai might stand without customers, while a portable one may already have been carried away, though we cannot know the routine of this exact place. A booklender may no longer be on his route. Behind a thin partition, the volume delivered earlier might lie closed beside folded things. Commerce has not disappeared. It has merely withdrawn from one form and begun to gather in another, nearer the river and the early market. The route becomes easier to recognize as we approach Nihonbashi. The broader street returns, lined by the dark fronts of merchant houses. Entrances between them still lead toward the rear road dwellings. The front street that carried peddlers, medicine vendors, and book lenders during busier hours now holds only a few early figures. They are widely spaced. One passes through the pale edge of a lantern's light, and another remains a moving outline until the buildings conceal them. Ahead, the air opens near the water. The river is first sensed as a broad absence among the structures, then seen as a dim surface below the sky. Warehouse roofs form a familiar line. The bridge emerges not all at once, but piece by piece. A dark approach, the suggestion of railings, the span crossing the river, and a faintly lighter space above it. We have returned to the place where our walk began, while the city remains suspended between the last portion of night and the coming day. At dusk, Nihonbashi had held the final traces of commercial movement. Shop panels slid closed, warehouse activity softened, and amber reflections appeared as daylight withdrew. Now the same elements return in reverse. A shutter remains closed, but someone has approached it from within. A warehouse wall is still dark, but movement has begun near the river. The water that gathered evening color now holds the first cool suggestion of a sky becoming less black. The bridge remains beneath us, while time changes around it. Nihonbashi stood at the center of the city's urban arrangement. A surviving model based on evidence from 1806 and 1829 places it within the broad historical frame of our walk. The structure was substantial, approximately 51 meters long and 8 meters wide, with timbers including Zelkova and Japanese cypress. Those measurements established the bridge as a real built place. Yet before dawn its scale is felt more quietly as the number of steps required to reach the middle. We begin across without haste. The boards beneath us are the opening image of the night returned. At dusk, they carried the last spaced footsteps of the day. Now they receive the first spaced footsteps of morning work. A figure passes with a burden we will not describe too precisely. Another pauses briefly before continuing toward the riverside. The bridge is not yet crowded. There is room for each sound to arrive alone, touch the wood, and fade over the water. A famous Hiroshige view from around 1848 or 1849 places Nihonbashi at the beginning of the Takedo. It also shows the nearby fish market, large fish being delivered, and warehouses along the river. Like the Ryogoku artwork, this work is a composed image rather than a literal view of one time-stamped morning. It gives us recognizable relationships: bridge, road, market activity, riverside storage, and the movement of goods at an important urban point. The fish market belongs here as labor and exchange, not as a meal. We do not follow ingredients into a menu or repeat the material of an earlier journey. Instead, we remain with the beginning of work. A delivery approaches. A load is received. Space near the market becomes more active than it was at dusk. Voices may be low at first, practical and brief. The artwork supports the broad activity, while the exact calls, tools, and sequences of this imagined morning must be held as possibilities rather than facts. Large fish appear in Hiroshige's composition as part of delivery near the market. We need not name their species, prices, or destinations. The size and movement are enough. Something taken from the water has entered the city's commercial system. It must pass from carrier to market, from one organized space to another. Before the streets fill, that work has already begun, joining the river's night movement to the landward routines of the coming day. The nearby warehouses give this activity a steady background. At dusk, they seem to settle after receiving and releasing goods. Before dawn, they become edges around renewed motion. A door may open, a cord may be checked, a package may be shifted, though these remain reasonable possibilities rather than actions fixed to one exact moment. The warehouses stood along the river. Our imagination adds only the lightest movements required to understand them as working places rather than silent shapes in an artwork. Behind the immediate market lay wider routes of supply. Vessels carried daily necessities from the Osaka region to Edo, including cotton, oil, and paper. Nihonbashi stood within that broad web of transport and exchange. Yet the web became tangible only in small acts. A load might cross a threshold. A tally might be kept. A boat might meet the bank. A worker could take several measured steps and then return for what remained. We do not need to make the early activity loud. Work can begin quietly when gestures are familiar. Two people may coordinate with a few words. Someone who knows the route does not need to examine every turning. A person accustomed to a warehouse can find a place in low light. These details are inferred rather than individually attested, but they preserve a modest truth about repeated labor. Practice reduces unnecessary motion. The city can begin waking through competence rather than commotion. From the middle of Nihonbashi, the river reflects more sky than lantern now. The amber marks remain, but they no longer dominate. A cool gray spreads between them, faint at first and easily mistaken for moonlight. The distinction does not need to be settled. Night light and approaching daylight overlap for a time. One fades while the other gathers. The water receives both without announcing which is which, just as it received the final colors of dusk at the beginning of our journey. The bridge's central place can be felt in the directions suggested around it. The Takedo begins from here in Hiroshige's famous view. Streets extend toward districts we have not visited. Water routes lead beyond what can be seen from the span. The city opens outward in many possible journeys, but ours is nearly complete. We do not follow the road into a new adventure. We stay where the circle closes, above the same river, under a sky that has traveled from dusk through moonlight toward dawn. At the start of the night, we stood here while shops closed one at a time. We watched light narrow behind panels and listened as the commercial day settled. Then the bells gave darkness an approximate shape. Gates, guardhouses, patrol, and fire lookout revealed the patient administration of a wooden city, with routines that varied over time and place. Returning now, we can feel those hours behind us without needing to count them. They have become a sequence of textures rather than a schedule. The small Nagaya room also returns to memory. Its thin partitions, dirt-floored entrance, hearth, water jar, wicker boxes, wrapped belongings, and folded bedding showed how much life could fit within a restrained space. At this pre-dawn hour, it is pleasant to imagine the room still quiet. The exact family and routine were never ours to claim. The room held an arrangement of useful things, and the night added the soft presence of neighbors breathing, shifting, and settling beyond the walls. The side streets returned next, marked by peddlers, borrowed books, inexpensive woodblock images, and the lanterns of late Edo stalls. Those small exchanges belonged to hours when the front streets were less dominant. A livelihood could travel toward the back row houses, a volume could pass from hand to hand, and a temporary workplace could appear away from the main road. Now those lantern circles have faded, but the goods and stories remain where the night left them, ready to become part of another day. Farther away, Ryogoku still spans the Sumida beneath a paling sky. The covered recreational boats in Hiroshige's moonlit view have passed from our sight. The reflected lanterns have stretched, broken, and disappeared. Yet the calm practice of waiting for the moon remains part of the night's shape. It taught us to accept time without pressing it forward. Dawn can be approached in the same way, not as a sudden event, but as a brightness that becomes noticeable only after it has already begun. Here at Nihonbashi, the old named 7 belongs to that approach. It suggests the pre-dawn departure known from the reference phrase, but it cannot be nailed to one exact modern clock time in every season. Darkness itself was divided into 6 changing portions. Summer and winter gave those portions different lengths. By remembering this, we avoid turning a flexible historical system into a single rigid conversion. We let 7 remain what it was in context, a useful named place within the changing night. The bell, the sky, and the earliest work each tell time in a different language. The bell offers an approximate communal signal. The sky offers gradual light. The market offers human preparation. None needs to agree with a digital display that does not belong here. Together they are enough to orient a person on the bridge. Night is not over in every room, but the city's next cycle has begun at its working edges. More movement gathers near the market, though we remain outside its center. Fish deliveries and warehouses were recognizable features of the Nihonbashi view, but we do not need to create a crowded catalog of baskets, blades, meals, or shouted prices. A few silhouettes crossing near the river are sufficient. A load passes from darkness into lamplight. A warehouse opening becomes briefly bright. Then the figures move beyond our view, continuing work that does not need an audience. On the bridge, the space between pedestrians slowly shortens. The change is still gentle. One traveler follows another after several breaths. A worker approaches from the opposite bank. A small group forms and separates near the end of the span. Clothing and occupations remain indistinct, as they should. Edo contained many ranks and forms of labor, and one composed picture cannot flatten them into a single routine. We observe only the broad fact of return. People are beginning to use the crossing again. We can imagine that the shops along the front street have not all opened. One panel might shift, while several others remain dark. A lamp might appear inside a merchant house. An entrance toward the rear dwellings might stay quiet. The city does not wake as one body. It wakes room by room and task by task. This unevenness makes the hour softer. Morning has begun near the river, while night continues only a short lane away. We stand once more near the middle of Nihonbashi. The central position of the bridge does not demand grandeur. It can still be understood through the ordinary surfaces first noticed at dusk. Timber underfoot, warehouse roofs beside the river, dark shop fronts, scattered lanterns, and reflections moving below. The difference lies in their direction. Before, each object was losing detail. Now each is slowly receiving it. Edges return. Distances become easier to judge. The water separates itself from the sky. There is no need to remain until full daylight. The market will grow busier, doors will open, and the bridge will carry more people. But that belongs to the city after our quiet passage. We can leave while the transformation is incomplete. Nihonbashi will not be abandoned when we go. It will continue as an organizing point in Edo, a place of roads, waterways, storage, deliveries, crossings, and countless ordinary arrivals whose names were never preserved. Our one night cannot stand for every night of the Edo period. It has been a careful imagining set broadly in the late period and guided by surviving evidence and artworks. Customs changed, neighborhoods differed, and artists composed reality rather than copying it. By keeping those limits visible, we do not lose the city. We allow it to remain human in its variety, partly attested and partly beyond recovery, close enough to approach but never reduced to certainty. We came to Edo at dusk without needing to remember every name. We crossed from bridge to bell, from watch house to row house, from Lantern Side Street to Moonlit River, and now back to the boards of Nihonbashi. The path has closed gently. Nothing has been solved, won, or hurried. An ordinary night has simply carried us through its changing spaces, while the city rested, watched, traded, read, drifted, and began again. As we leave the bridge, the first cool light lies softly on the river, and the final darkness loosens between the warehouses. Let the footsteps behind us grow faint. Let the market remain at the edge of hearing, and let the old city continue without asking anything more of you. Thank you for spending the night in history with me. I'm the Yawning Historian. Good night.